This conference will now be recorded.
Just reinforces that perhaps should be a state of mind we live with all the time. What would happen if we turned on the tap and nothing came out? So with that said, I want to say my name is Connie Barron, and as a member of the board of Gem of the Hills, we welcome you to this wonderful facility. We hope all of you are members of Gem of the Hills for a wonderful $25 a year. You'll be kept updated on programs that go on here. You'll have an opportunity to take classes here and know about the programs that we have. But most importantly, it helps us sustain this wonderful facility and keep the lights on and available for things just like this. So you can go to our website, gemofthehills.org, and you can join there, and we hope all of you will. Also, I'm a member of the board of Hill Country Alliance. So there are a lot of wonderful information pieces in the back on important conservation and environmental issues, our water, our land, our night skies. Please, they are a wonderful resource. And after this program, if any of you missed it or you want to refer to anybody else, it will be recorded and it will be on the Hill Country Alliance site so that you can access it there for others to see and tune in again, or if you just really, really miss something and want to see it one more time, share it with others. So with that, I'm going to move on. Thank you. I will say restrooms are here. Be careful if you need to utilize them during the presentation, because there are some wires there. So please tread carefully and be careful. But otherwise, that's that. Afterwards, we'll have questions and answers, and Dr. Mace will tell you whether he wants to do questions during or wait till after. It's his program. But he is so accomplished that I have to read his introduction because I tried to commit it to memory, but I couldn't because there were just too many things there. So I'm just going to read it. Robert Mace is the Executive Director and Chief Water Policy Officer of the Meadow Center for Water and the Environment and a Professor of Practice in the Department of Geography at Texas State University. He has over 30 years of experience in hydrology, hydrogeology, stakeholder processes, and water policy. He has a BS in geophysics and an MS in hydrology. Oh my God. From the New Mexico Institute of Mining and Technology, and a PhD in hydrogeology from the University of Texas at Austin. But otherwise, he's pretty much an underachiever. So with that said, we are so fortunate to have it. If you're not familiar with the Meadow Center, I do encourage you to go to the Meadow Center website as well. Amazing information, research, outreach, study in water and the environment. And with that, we are so excited to turn it over to Dr. Robert Mace.
Thank you so much, Connie. I've turned into enough of a professor these days that I need to put a timer on myself. Otherwise, we'll be here all night talking about water, which is fine with me. Might not be fine with everybody. I was asked to talk about surface water and groundwater interaction on the Blanco River. And it's where the two water resources come together and interact. It's an interesting scientific topic. It's also an interesting policy and legal topic. Surface water is owned by the state of Texas. And unless you kind of own property on the river and use it for your household or some of your cattle, you have to get a permit from the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality to use it. And then that actually becomes a private property right, which you can then trade and sell. Groundwater, on the other hand, is owned by the landowners and subject to regulation by groundwater conservation districts. And of course, you do have one here in Blanco County. But generally for, similar to surface water, if you're using it for household use or some cattle, not a confined area feedlot, mind you, but some cattle, you don't have to get a permit to drill and use those wells. Although a lot of districts require, or at least encourage you to register your well with the district, which I would encourage you to do. Some people are like, well, I don't want the government knowing what I'm doing. But as a small user, you're gonna, can you hear me? Put it up. Oh, geez. Okay. All right, I'll do that. Thank you. Where was it? Oh, if you don't need to get a permit from the groundwater district, but you should go ahead and register your well, would be my advice, because you're a little pumper. And if a big pumper comes in and is affecting your well, there won't be any kind of history of your well or background data on your well for you to attempt to address that issue in the future. So you should definitely look at that. So for groundwater surface water interaction, I work at the Meadow Center, which is in the old hotel at Aquarina Springs, San Marcos Springs. And this is a fabulous, really over-the-top example of surface water groundwater interaction, where the river literally comes up out of the ground, out of the Edwards Aquifer, and then flows as the San Marcos River downstream. But there's a lot of other ways that surface water groundwater interaction expresses itself, and not always as dramatic, but there are some dramatic examples out in this area. So the outline for the presentation today, the first one to talk about concepts and measurements of surface water groundwater interaction. Talk about broadly surface water groundwater interaction in Texas, then take it down to what that looks like on the Blanco River. Now the Blanco River is interacting with the Trinity Aquifer, which is underneath our feet here, as well as the Edwards Aquifer, which is a little closer to San Marcos. Then I want to talk about some of the things that kind of impact surface water groundwater interaction, things that can change, that can impact that. And then talk very briefly about a new groundwater surface water model that we will be working on with a number of other partners that's focused on the Blanco River to really be able to simulate in greater detail how the aquifer and the Blanco River are interacting with each other. So concepts and measurements. Back when I was in grade school, we did a play for the water cycle. I want to say it was maybe third grade or something. I was evaporation, right? Anybody else evaporation? Did you do that? But yeah, this is the water cycle, the evaporation from the ocean, the condensation in the clouds, rainfall, runoff, going back to the ocean. Now, back when I was in school, we didn't talk about the groundwater component. So it's nice about this representation of the water cycles. It shows the groundwater component. And it's showing surface water leaking into the subsurface, into the ground, feeding aquifers. And it's also showing the groundwater coming back up out of the ground in springs, into a lake and out of a lake. And then even interacting down here with the ocean. Mountains in Texas, at least this part of Texas, aren't quite that big, but most of this stuff we do see. Like Lake Medina is an example of water comes in on the western side, groundwater comes in on the western side of that reservoir and leaks out on the eastern side. You get down to the Gulf of Mexico, we've got a Gulf Coast aquifer, the groundwater discharges to that aquifer. Now zooming in a little bit on a river or a stream and an aquifer underneath it, this is what surface water, groundwater concepts of it look like. And we generally talk about losing streams and gaining streams. A losing stream is a stream that's losing water as it's going along. Not to evaporation, but to leaking into the ground. And so this upper one is showing water from a stream leaking into the ground directly into an aquifer. And this example is showing them hydraulically connected. This bottom plot here is showing these are graphics I borrowed from the US Geological Survey, but it's showing what they call a disconnected stream. So the water table is below the bottom of the stream, and it's leaking water into it. And you see the water table, it might be a hump of the water table because there's water coming to the aquifer that can create that kind of an upwelling in the water table there. Both of these are losing streams. Honestly, I don't know why the USGS makes this distinction. In fact, this bottom stream is far more common in my experience than the upper one. You generally don't see that upper thing going on until you're kind of transitioning from a losing stream into something called a gaining stream. This is my most dramatic example of a losing stream. This is a Cripple Crawfish Cave on Onion Creek. When I first moved to Austin in '91, it was a big thing in the news where two dudes were walking down a trail. They've been drinking. That's foreshadowing. And the creek was flowing, and they saw this feature. And one of them was like, wow, check that out, you know. And of course, you do like any drunk dude would do, you find some log or something to throw out there and watch it get sucked down in there. And so finally, one of them was like, here, hold my beer, and waded out there, and he got sucked in, which is the sad part of the story. And then the news channels were out there, television stations were out there, and there were emergency people out there. And one of the emergency guys is like, well, you know, it's sucking air down into this cave, so there's a chance this guy is down there because there's air and he still might be alive. Then they cut to another couple folks where they're like, I've got this half full milk jug, you know, check out how powerful this is. Chucks it out there, goes down. You know, while the other emergency folks are putting in a coffer dam to kind of block off the flow so they can go get this guy. And I just, to this day, I kind of imagine him clinging to the side of that cave, you know, going, oh, thank goodness, you know, they're coming to rescue me. He did die, unfortunately. But anyway, this is very dramatic losing stream. This is recharging directly into the Edwards Aquifer. And in fact, most, if not all, of the streams that cross the recharge zone for the Edwards Aquifer lose water. That's how most of the recharge to the Edwards occurs, is through these losing streams. Now, losses don't have to be this dramatic. It might be little fractures along the way. It loses a little bit as the stream or the river is flowing along, up to you know, looking this dramatic. I've seen more dramatic springs or streams actually in Florida, where pretty much an entire river just goes down a sinkhole and disappears, and it pops up a few miles elsewhere. So that's losing streams. Then there's also gaining streams. And so this is a case where groundwater is moving from the aquifer into the stream. And this diagram here is showing, you know, when the water table is higher than the river, which is then pushing water towards the river or towards the stream, and you're getting a gain in flow in the river as you move down it. And pretty spectacular example of that is Jacob's Well. You have this vertical shaft in the limestone that just suddenly comes up and is flowing and adding this flow to the creek. So that's a very dramatic, but similar to losing stream, there's also less dramatic, where it's not real obvious where the water is coming in. It's just mile after mile. It's just slowly seeping into the river and adding to the flow. That would be a gaining stream. And then I've made this up, but because the USGS doesn't show this, I don't know if anybody from the USGS here. I'm making some suggestions for the reports. And so that's not a real stream, ambivalent stream. There's also a lot of streams that aren't interacting with the aquifer at all. There may be clay in the bottom, which is what I've kind of expertly drawn in here, or maybe the entire stream is going across clay or shale. It's just, there's just no groundwater interacting with it. And so that's also actually pretty common. So how do you measure stream flow, which gets to how we measure surface water groundwater interaction? And the way you do this is you break a stream. Let's say this is a stream here, break it into pieces, and then you go in with a way of measuring the flow. This is kind of an old school pygmy meter is what it's called, but they have fancier ones that are electronic without the, this looks like an anemometer or a wind measurer, but it's actually measuring the flow of water as the water flows across it. And then at each segment that you've carefully measured out, you're measuring the speed of the water. And then you add all those segments up with cross-sectional areas, put it all together, and you get a stream flow for that point at that point in time. And this is a clever image stolen from U.S. Geological Survey, who really are the experts in the United States on stream flow measurements. In fact, they were the ones who invented it back in the late 1800s. And it's a clever photo because the guy set up a camera and then took a picture of himself several times. Either that or he has 7 twins. They all get out there, very convenient, get out there and measure at the same time. So once you can make those types of measurements, you can then make them on a stream, hopefully on the same day or around the same time. And so you can measure stream flow at this upper reach here. You can measure it down here, and then you can compare the two measurements. So if the one at the lower reach is greater than that one, tells you you've got a gaining stream. If it's lower than the upper reach, tells you you're probably losing water. Or if it's the same, it's telling you your stream is pretty ambivalent about the aquifer underneath it. I chose these very carefully to where there isn't a tributary coming. You make an assumption that there isn't some fugitive supply of water coming in or coming out. So like if the city of Blanco is right here and they're pumping water out of the Blanco River, you'd have to account for that in order to actually figure out what's happening on the stream reach. Or if I put it down here and there's flow coming in from this creek, we'd also have to come over here and measure this creek to account for that flow coming in. And that's pretty much how it's done with measuring stream flows. There's another way of measuring stream flow, and it's through these kind of real-time monitoring gauges. And the USGS operates these. There are several of them. I'll show you a map, several of them on the Blanco River. And what they do here is they'll make those measurements like that dude and the 7 twins make, and they'll do it at different levels in the stream. Because each level of the stream has a different amount of flow through it. They generate something called a rating curve, and it tells you that if you know the height of the stream, then you can correlate that to a certain flow. And so these real-time gauges is they'll put a pressure transducer down there or some way of measuring pressure where they can measure this height and then collect these measurements and then shoot them up to a satellite, or maybe it's a radio telemetry type device. Typically, those measurements are made every 15 minutes and then shared. And then you get a lot of measurements over time. Allows you to see flood waves, things like that. You can go to the U.S. Geological Survey webpage, and I'll give Connie a copy of this presentation because I've got some links in it, and she can share it with you, hopefully, and you can just click on the links and go straight here. But this is on their webpage, and all these dots you see are stream gauges. And here's the Blanco area. The colors are showing, and this was actually taken a little earlier today, this morning. I pulled this out and it's showing you kind of what the flows are at some of these gauges. Is it normal? Is it below? Is it above normal? The white dots, there isn't enough of a record for them to make those assessments. And in fact, when I was with the Water Development Board, before I joined Texas State, we started a program to put in stream gauges for early flood warning. And the Blanco, and you're all familiar with those floods, was the first stop for putting in new gauges. This is just zooming in. And so there's Blanco over yonder. This gauge in Wimberley has been there a while. You know, if you ever go through Wimberley over the bridge, just look real carefully for gray boxes or gray box. And that's the USGS. A lot of times it has a USGS logo on it. And then there's a bunch of stations along the way. I'm going to show you the data from today for up there. It's upstream from Blanco. And it looks like this. It shows automatically, it brings up the last week. And so from August 12th till midday today. And you'll see, and this is showing gauge height, so it hasn't been converted to a flow yet, but it's showing gauge height. And you'll notice it's kind of showing a nice level gauge height here. And then goes up. So there was some rain. Was there some rain here? August 16th. Yeah, there we go. There's some confirmation. Then it kind of ebbed off and then came back flat again. But you also notice it's at a higher level than it was back kind of before this event started. And scientists can do something called a base flow separation. So the base flow is considered the groundwater component of flow to the river, assuming there isn't a dam upstream that's releasing a consistent amount of flow, because that could be a different base flow. And then you get the storm flow from the rainfall event. And then typically after that happens, you'll have water get, more water get pushed into the aquifer or into the stream banks and kind of return back at a higher level. And you can do an analysis to remove the storm flow component and look at the base flow only, and then make comparisons between stations down a stream or down a river to also get a sense of surface water groundwater interaction. This is, there's many different ways and opinions on how best to do this, which makes it a little uncertain. So really the better way, in my opinion, is to get that dude and 7 twins out on the river and make measurements to see what those look like. Now on the groundwater side, and we can also measure groundwater, and it's a bit easier to do the actual measurement. Usually the hardest part is getting access to the well. Hopefully you're not trespassing when you do it, because then you can get killed. So hopefully you have permission to measure those wells. But this is the ideal case where you have this is a monitoring well specifically, and this has electric equipment down there that when it hits the water table or the water level in the well, it'll beep, tell you it's gotten down there. You can then measure how deep it is, subtract off the elevation above the land surface, and then come up with a water level, groundwater level elevation at that point. Now, if you do this in a number of wells across your area, you can then generate a map. It's called the potentiometric surface, but it's basically a map of the top of the water levels. I'm not saying water table because in this particular case, which is showing Middle Trinity, back in work I did in the late 90s, and it's a confined aquifer, so it's showing kind of the water level surface. Unfortunately, I don't show the dots where I measured or got measurements for water levels, but just like if you went out and like a surveyor, if you bought a lot and you're going to build on the lot, and the surveyor comes out and shoots different elevations for your topography and then contours it up real nice. You do the same thing with water levels in an aquifer, and then it contours up real nice. Now, what's really cool about this is that it tells you a lot of information about the aquifer from what amounts to a simple measurement of where the water is in a well. It tells you where the water's coming from, because just like if you took a giant volleyball on your lot and it's hilly, it's going to go the path of least resistance, assuming you've clear cut it, which you shouldn't do, but you clear cut it. There's no trees in the way. It's going to go down the steepest part of the slope. And generally, groundwater will do the same thing. So these lines are purposely drawn at 90-degree angles to these lines, which are equal elevations of water levels in the aquifer. So this is why we can say, hey, water is starting, groundwater is starting up in this area, and it's flowing through here. It's flowing towards the Edwards Aquifer in Comal and Bexar County, northern Bexar County, swinging around here up to the Colorado River. Now, let me get a drink real quick. So another neat thing about measuring water level contours is you can also figure out how the aquifer is interacting with the river or stream. And so in a gaining stream, you'll see the water levels, or water level contours bend upstream. And when you see that as a hydrogeologist, you're like, oh, it's discharging to that surface water feature. If you see the opposite, then it's telling you that it's discharging to the stream is discharging to the aquifer systems. The aquifer is taking water. If it goes straight across, it suggests that there's no interaction. It's an ambivalent stream. So let's go back to this these water level contours for the Trinity, Middle Trinity aquifer. And what do we see? With Guadalupe, wow, that's a major bend up. There's another, not as big, but a bend up. This one kind of goes straight across. Cibolo Creek kind of goes straight across. And here it actually kind of goes along it, so it's kind of pretty ambivalent. Here on the Blanco, we're actually seeing it go upstream, so it's suggesting that it's a source of water. Now I called this an ambivalent stream down here. It's actually incorrect. This part of the Trinity aquifer in northern Bexar County behaves very much like the Edwards aquifer, so water flows through it like a greased pig. And so there's a lot of water that gets lost in that reach of the Cibolo Creek that recharges the Trinity, and then it just shoots down to the Edwards aquifer. And so it's hard to see the impact there. But so that's pretty cool. We can actually see that maybe this uppermost reach doesn't seem to be much going on. Maybe there's a little hint here, definitely a hint there. This isn't quite of the detail that we need to say something specific about the Blanco River, but it's telling us something. So, and we'll come back to that in more detail. So let's just talk about surface water, groundwater interaction in Texas. And I'm going to start off by kind of sharing with you a water budget for the entire state. Just to kind of put numbers in context a bit, and there's also some kind of amazing stuff in here. So this is acre feet per year. An acre foot is like 1 foot of water on a football field, about 326,000 gallons. So an average year, Texas gets 379 million acre feet year of water. 7.2 million evaporates off of free water surfaces, so like a river or stream or lake, back up into the atmosphere. Any I know there's at least one master naturalist in the crowd. Any other master naturalists? Those damn plants use up 320 million. I love plants. That's amazing. I remember when I first saw this, my jaw dropped. I'm like, what? What that means is that 86% of the rain that falls goes back up into the sky, which of course is the vast majority. It's pretty amazing. But fortunately, not all of it does evaporate back up. We do get a bit going in the surface water, so 47.2 million acre feet in the lakes and rivers from runoff, and then another 4.7 million acre feet of rain that falls directly onto reservoirs and directly onto river surfaces. But this is also kind of another interesting little tidbit, is that of that amount, 35 million acre feet go to the Texas coast, basically to the bays and estuaries and out to the Gulf of Mexico. And then 9.3 million goes to other states. So Oklahoma, Arkansas, Louisiana. Hard to believe we let that happen. There actually tend to be interstate agreements on sharing rivers, so to a certain degree that's supposed to happen. So 85% of surface water that we get actually flows out of the state, whether to the Gulf of Mexico or to the other states. I should also note, in case y'all think I'm heating, we do need water to go down to the basin estuaries and support the fisheries or anybody that goes down there fishes the environment. But still, it's kind of amazing that so much of it does flow out of the state. And then you got little old groundwater at the end of the day that's getting about 5.1 million acre feet, and then contributing 1.3 million acre feet back to surface water. So I just want to show that water budget. I have some issues with this, so I'll talk to you a little bit briefly, or in a bit about briefly. But there's a tremendous amount that goes back up into the sky, which is tied to temperature and plants. Now this is a map that shows aquifer recharge zones in brown. So that's the opportunity for surface water to interact with groundwater, as well as the more major rivers and streams across the state. And so anywhere you see kind of a blue line over the brown is telling you there's an opportunity for surface water groundwater interaction. There's a lot of opportunity for surface water groundwater interaction in the state. And here we are in the hill country, the source water for lots of streams and rivers. Pretty much the entire hill country is an opportunity for that interaction. Water Development Boards, about 5 years ago, did a base flow separation analysis for the state with some other magic, and came up with this map to show surface water groundwater interaction across the state. So for the most part, you're seeing blue dots corresponding to the brown area I showed you on the previous map. And then the size of that dot is showing you relative amounts of flow. These are in cubic feet per second. The biggest dots are over 100 cubic feet per second. The smallest ones are less than 0.5 cubic feet per second. Not surprisingly, the wetter part of the state in the east has a great deal of surface water groundwater interaction. And this is water that's discharging from an aquifer into a river or a stream. But you also notice that in our neck of the woods here, a little bit of an anomaly. It's like things are petering off as you're heading west, and then boom. We're seeing Kamal and San Marcos Springs, a number of other places where there's interaction. And a big reason for that is the geology that's underneath their feet. We got a lot of limestones. Limestones tend to dissolve due to carbonic acid that rainfall picks up as it infiltrates through the soils, creates vuggy porosity, kind of holy porosity, and allows a lot more water to flow through. So, Jacob's Well is a perfect example. That's why we have some of these caves. And you wind up getting really good flows out of those, which is what this shows up. They estimated 9.3 million acre feet per year going from groundwater to surface water, which is about 30% of all surface water flows. Of course, that's heavily biased by East Texas. But that hopefully explains kind of the, one of my issues here is with these guys, it's 1995. They only show 1.3 million. So one of these days, I hope to con a graduate student to update this graphic and we'll come up with something more accurate. So now let's talk about the blanket. A lot of what I'm going to talk about is based on this excellent paper published by the South Texas Geological Society. And some of you may recognize these names if you're involved in groundwater, but Brian Hunt, Brian Smith, Marcus Gary, Alex Brown, Douglas Weirman, Jeff Watson, and David Johns. Took a look at Onion Creek and the Blanco River, specifically in surface water groundwater interactions. So here's the Blanco River, and they looked at it with respect, well, it really is, it's the whole Blanco River, with respect to the Trinity and the Edwards. So this is Blanco River, there's Blanco up there. Shows some springs up there as well. And so let's talk a little bit about the geology. This is a old cross section. It goes down near Canyon Lakes. It's not exactly through this area, but this is pretty much kind of what this area looks like. And to the west, we got the Edwards Plateau, right? You go through the beautiful hill country up and down the hills, and then it gets kind of flat and boring for a long while. That's the Edwards Plateau. And then you have these hills because the Edwards group and some of the Trinity rocks that make up the Trinity Aquifer have been eroded away. A big part of that is because of the Balcones Fault Zone here and younger sediments that head off to the Gulf of Mexico. There's a kind of an old mountain range buried deep down called the Ouachitas that led to the creation of this fault zone that was created when the Rocky Mountains uplifted out of the earth, and it kind of pulled the western part of Texas up out of the ground. But then it left this at a lower elevation. It's interesting, the Ouachitas, if you look at the geology, they were created and are actually coterminous with the Appalachian Mountains. So if your spouse is after you about hiking the Appalachian Trail, just take them downtown San Marcos and walk around a little bit. So, another hot tip is all those sediments on this side, kind of towards the Gulf of Mexico, are pretty much remnants of the Rocky Mountains that have been eroded and came across Texas until the Pecos River pirated north and intercepted those sediments. And so if your spouse wants to go to the Rocky Mountains, just take them to Seguin. I'm sure you'll impress them. So this shows the Edwards Aquifer, which we're going to talk about. And so that's why you see Edwards here and you see Edwards over there. There used to be Edwards over this entire area. It's been eroded away. And then there's an upper Trinity Aquifer and a middle Trinity Aquifer. There's actually a lower that's not shown here. The upper Trinity Aquifer has different hydraulic properties, which is why we differentiate it from the middle Trinity Aquifer. Middle Trinity tends to be more permeable. You tend to get, not always, but you tend to get better wells in the middle Trinity than the upper. There also tends to be a little bit of an impermeable, a relatively impermeable layer at the bottom of the Trinity. And this becomes important when we start talking about what's going on with the Blanco River. Blanco isn't quite accurate. If this was maybe drawn across, but Blanco is kind of sitting geologically in something that's analogous to that spot right there. You know, on top of the upper Trinity, but with the lower Trinity below it. This is showing more of the geology, but I already talked about that a little bit. And so this is a diagram from that paper, and it's showing, again, the Blanco River basin, showing the Blanco River. There's Jacob's Well. This is Pleasant Valley Springs here. So it's showing the two major springs. It's showing San Marcos Springs down here as well. And it's showing the geology. So this light green color here are Edwards rocks. So this is Edwards rocks at the land surface. You know, this is where you're starting to pick up the Edwards Plateau. This is like a finger that hadn't been eroded away yet. This light green color is that upper Trinity, generally the upper Glen Rose. This darker color here is the middle Trinity. And I'm pointing that out because that becomes real important when we take a look at what's going on with these flows. And so what they did was they compiled different studies of measured flows down the Blanco River. And I believe they did their own flows as well. And it shows kind of how the flow is changing as you go from the headwaters at 0 here down to the Edwards recharge zone at 80 miles here. Now I'm just going to focus on the green line here. The dashed line means they weren't really measuring out there, but they see an increase here, small springs. You see a decrease in flow, suggesting it's somewhere between here and here it's losing. no flow, and then suddenly some springs pop up. Pleasant Valley Spring in the Blanco really kicks things up quite a bit. This is cubic feet per second. And then you just see there's obviously a bunch of springs all the way down. Here's Cypress Creek, which is now capturing the flow or bringing in the flow. Jacob's Well. Not sure if that's real or not. Could be real. Could be they were late in the day and they were starting to drink. And then it hits the Edwards recharge zone. You see things drop. So this is making those stream flow measurements down the river, and then looking at how it's changing. Knowing where there's springs, and then seeing that yep, data's agreeing with that. So in a map form, this is what it looks like. So here's the headwaters of the Blanco, and it's showing gaining stream reach all along there. So it's gaining flow as it comes through Blanco. And it's sitting on top of that upper Trinity, that upper Glen Rose, and then as it comes into the middle Trinity, it becomes a losing reach. But then it starts picking up flow again. There's the Pleasant Valley Spring. Here's Jacob's Well. So this is losing up until you hit Jacob's Well. All that losing stream reach is recharging this little flow system that's feeding Jacob's Well. And it's gaining all the way down here until it starts hitting the Edwards outcrop. And then it loses flow, and then it winds up gaining again until it gets down here with the San Marcos River. Onion Creek is kind of showing us a similar pattern, although it's not showing. Where it goes losing, it's not showing losses there. You might be wondering, it's like, how come we still got the middle Trinity, but yet it's going gaining? You see these lines here? These are faults. So some of those faults are creating barriers, pretty much forcing the groundwater flow up to the surface. And that's what's happening. Both of these springs, Jacob's Well as well as Pleasant Valley Spring. So just another cross section from that same paper along the Blanco. It's a conceptual diagram, so it's like here's our best idea. Showing Blanco on the upper Glen Rose, which is analogous to the upper Trinity. We got springs, it's gaining. We got some faulting here. We don't have the barrier of the upper Glen Rose anymore. It goes into a more permeable system. Leaks in, pops up because of a fault, goes down to the Edwards. Part of this flow actually pops up at San Marcos and heads on its way. So let's talk about what might impact those surface water groundwater interactions. And a lot of these measurements you kind of saw, although I only talked about the Hunt studies numbers with that light green line. There was a number of other lines there that were at different heights. So at different times of the year, be different amounts of flow, depending what the flow is, depending what the levels in the aquifer are. Although it didn't appear to be the case on the Blanco River, there's other rivers in the states where, one year a reach may be losing, and then the next year it actually may be gaining. So it can actually change status. And then there could be some longer term changes over time. Drought has an impact. If you're lowering the water table, what might have been gaining at the upper reaches now is losing stream. So you can have those impacts. Pumping can have an impact. I'm happily married, but if things go wrong, I'm counting on my postcard collection of water wells to get me another wife. I've got like almost 1,000 of these, but this is my proudest card. It's actually for the Ogallala Aquifer. I'm one of the earliest high production wells, but As the well technology came along and people started pumping more, that impacts surface water groundwater interaction. Probably the most dramatic is Comanche Springs out in Fort Stockton. It's in the Edwards part of the Edwards Plateau, karstic, KV, limestone, and they started putting in wells in 47, and by end of 61, the springs stopped flowing for a couple decades. So pumping can have a big impact. This is pretty dramatic. San Antonio Springs, similar story. San Pedro Springs in San Antonio. It only comes back now when the water levels in the Edwards are really high. Another thing is Gunnar Brune. He's kind of like the spring guru of Texas. Has a green book. It's about that thick, and it goes for like $600. But he also did a report for the Water Development Board back in the day in '75, and I've been working with a student to revisit all these springs to see if more of them went dry. He noted that 11% of his springs went dry by 1975. He actually said a quarter if you read this report, but we found some errors in his entries. But 11% went dry by 1975, and by this year, 28% of the springs in this report have gone dry. So as pumping continues and lowers water levels, we'll see those springs get dry. This is an example from El Paso that's kind of interesting. Back in the day, El Paso was 100% reliant on groundwater. These days, it's conjunctive, so it's using the aquifer, but it's also using the Rio Grande. And back before they pumped a lot, the Rio Grande was gaining water from the aquifer, the Hueco Bolson, about as much as 5,000 acre-feet per year. And then as the wells came in, it actually reversed the flow. So these days, 30,000 acre-feet is leaking from the Rio Grande into that aquifer. So just a dramatic example of how you can flip that whole relationship in a big way. These are maps showing water level changes in half decades. So the warmer colors mean greater water level changes. The cooler colors mean water level rises. This is 95 to 2000 in the upper left, 2000 to 2005 in the upper right, 2005 to 2010 in the lower left, 2010 to 2015 in the lower right. If you look in the hill country area, there were some declines in 95 to 2000. That was anybody who was here during that time? That was a tough time. One of the first things I worked on when I joined the state, the Water Development Board, was the river drying up here in a frantic well drilling frenzy to try and find water for the city of Blanco. I've got some awesome war stories, but not enough time to tell you about that. Water levels recovered between 2000 and 2005, and then we're down again overall by 2010 and down again by 2015. So we are seeing more pumping occurring in the hill country. The desired future condition, which is essentially a management goal for the groundwater districts have for the aquifer, is on average a 30-foot water level decline. So there's anticipated to be more water pumped. I took a look at a couple wells in the Blanco area. And I got a link here. This is from the Water Development Board. They have a nice online interactive water well database. And so I took a look at this well. It's in the Upper Glen Rose, the Upper Trinity. You can kind of see when they put that pump on. The geologist in me sees maybe a slight decline, but it looks like it's pretty flat. So it doesn't appear to be declines, at least in the city. This is a well a little bit south of Blanco. This one is in the Cow Creek, so it's in the Middle Trinity. And this one might be showing more of an overall decline. In the Middle Trinity is a better target for pumping. So more people are putting wells in there. Hopefully nobody will throw anything if I mention climate change, but this is a concern, particularly for the hill country, I think. The increase in temperature will increase that evapotranspiration and evaporation, which means less runoff into the surface streams, less water in the reservoirs, and also less recharge to the aquifer. And so that could be something that changes surface water groundwater interaction, as well as surface water resources and groundwater resources over time. The Edwards Aquifer Authority is seeking to renew their incidental take permit related to the endangered species at San Marcos and Comal Springs. And they're pretty much being required to look at climate change. And so, because the hill country is the water funnel for the Edwards Aquifer, they will be taking a look at this. So stay tuned. I think over the next couple of years, you'll probably hear more about how much of a concern this could be. What I can share with you is that I've been involved in the City of Austin's water planning process, and reservoirs don't go dry for the next 100 years when Austin grows from 1 million people to 4 million people. You can believe that. If there's no climate change, but you throw in warming component, those reservoirs will start to go dry 4 years at a time. So it's a little disturbing. And then increased pumping. So this is population growth from the previous state water plan. I haven't updated this since the state water plan updated I think it was last week, 2022 water plan, but it's showing what the population growth is looking like. So it looks 50 years, Travis County is expected to grow in population 100%. The San Marcos area is supposed to grow 278%, Hays County, which is amazing. That's 3 times as many bobcats. 73% for y'all's area. So you're expecting to see some pretty good growth. I took a look at the water plan, 2022 water plan for the city of Blanco, and they're envisioning population growing from about 2,300 today to about 3,000 people in 2070. How about y'all? That seems low. I was a little surprised. I'm hoping I'm missing a 0 there. But that's what they're projecting. Given, our house in Austin appreciated 30% in 1 month. It's just affordability issues are driving people out of urban core, and just the growth is, in general, is pretty amazing. And then another big concern in the hill country was surface water groundwater interaction. Mostly talked about volumes of water, but there's also water quality. So wherever water is going from the stream and river into the aquifer, that's a vector for contamination. So if there's something nasty in the stream, it's then going to go into the aquifer and potentially affect people's wells. So that's been, I know we've got Nick Dornack working with the city on trying to look at land application techniques to kind of prevent wastewater discharge to the creek, because that is an issue or a concern in the hill country with increased nutrients and algae blooms and things like that. As well as, people are also concerned about pharmaceuticals, trace amounts of pharmaceuticals that are in treated wastewater. There was a professor from Baylor that came and tested San Marcos Springs, found trace amounts of cocaine in the spring. So, yeah, I see some of y'all are like, I'm heading there tomorrow, but you'd drown yourself before you got a buzz. I'll tell you that right now. But that's an indication that there's sewage, septic tank, or maybe just somebody just lost their stash in the spring at an inopportune time. But pretty much, these pharmaceuticals are showing up in the water supplies. And of course, they are in treated wastewater. yeah, and I think I was just, point here was just to note that, Blanco's up here. And really any city that's putting wastewater in, it's gonna, especially if it goes over the Edwards, but, it's gonna then kind of leak in down here. And then probably come up a well or come up out of a spring. And it may actually come out of San Marcos Springs at some point. And then finally, just very briefly, I want to talk about better models on the way. Some of these diagrams I've showed you kind of relate to numerical groundwater flow models. So, similar to the weather people running weather models to predict where the hurricane's going to go, where Fred and Grace are going to go. We also have numerical tools to assess how aquifers and streams might respond to stresses like changing climate or increased pumping, things like that. The model right now for this area is what we call a regional model, so it covers the entire hill country. And when you do that, you wind up foregoing the level of detail that a groundwater district might want. So what we're trying to do, working with Southwest Research Institute, working with groundwater districts, is to develop a very detailed model focused on surface water, groundwater in the Blanco River. And we call it Bratwurst. It's the Blanco River Aquifer Assessment Tool for water and understanding resiliency and sustainability trends. So that is not a joke. Yeah, one of my hobbies is they call it acronyms, and you try to find something that fits, something clever. And the stakeholders that we've been working with insisted on the extra A because they were a little concerned about the just making people hungry, I guess. But you'll hear more about Bratwurst. The county, Hays County has put up a bunch of money to work on this model. Water Development Board is putting in some money, Edwards Aquifer Authority, and several of the groundwater districts are talking about providing money. Kind of expect to see some funds there. And then this model will be used as a tool for the districts to assess, can use it to kind of assess maybe larger permits, impacts of increased pumping. For example, the current model that's used, you really can't see the impacts on Jacobs Well. So the hope is that with this model, we would be able to see impacts on Jacobs Well, Pleasant Valley Spring, and other springs. Since we're focused on that surface water groundwater interaction, it has resolution. The one last thing, this next part is a joke, but when we were pitching this project and talking to a potential funder, and he was asking, Blanco River Aquifer Assessment Tool for Water and Understanding Resilience and Sustainability Trends, that spell anything? I'm like, yeah, Bratwurst. He goes, well, if you add beer to that, then you can count us in for providing some money. So, and for the betterment of the environmental and ecological resources. So with that, just a quick review before I open up for questions. So hopefully I did a good job kind of explaining how aquifers and rivers and streams interact with each other, how we get measurements and the importance of those measurements. Why groundwater districts, I don't know if anybody has a well that the groundwater district measures them, but why it's important to get that information because it tells us so much about the aquifer. Gave you kind of a big overview of surface water groundwater interaction in Texas. Showed you how groundwater and surface water are interacting in the Blanco, as well as kind of potential future impacts. And certainly, probably the more immediate impact is the growth. And along with that growth comes increased pumping. What will that increased pumping do? And then also on the chemical side of wastewater discharge to hill country streams and that not only affecting the stream, but potentially affecting groundwater systems. And stay tuned that there'll be better models on the way. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions y'all might have. Sir?
We can drive across the bridges and get our own measure. Every time we drive across, we go down and down the bridge side. But we can't see the ground. How many monitoring wells should we have on that aquifer? Per mile?
So great question. So the question is I'm going to paraphrase, is that, you know, we can see when the river is low or high, but it's harder to see what's going on with the aquifer. That's one reason why I'm jealous of hydrologists, you know, because you can go and you know, see a lake or a beautiful stream and all that jazz. As a hydrogeologist, usually going to visit a piece of PVC sticking out of the ground. It's not as exciting, although the springs are exciting. That's why we kind of love spring so much. And then the question is like, what is the required density of measurement? Sorry to give you this answer, but like it depends. I think it depends on kind of what you're going after. Like if you're really seeking to, as a scientist, I'd say as much as possible. You want as much as possible, but then budgetary constraints come in. But if you're like really interested in, say, water level declines from pumping, you probably have more wells around the pumping center to understand what that looks like and how far it's reaching out. And maybe not as many out in more rural areas where, you know, household wells and windmills aren't doing a whole lot to aquifer levels. If you're interested in surface water groundwater interaction, you're probably trying to find every well you can that's you know, close to the stream that you can get access to. And you know, one of the challenges of measuring water levels is, you know, getting permission from the property owner to, you know, get out there and actually measure the well, or can it be measured? Is there enough of a record? Like, is it a mystery well? We don't know how deep it is. We don't know where it's screened and all that jazz. That can be a challenge as well. So short answer is as much as possible. Yeah.
Do you have any ideas on climate change?
So the question is climate change and how it affects rain. So what's that? You know, weather's crazy in Texas. And there's a lot of variability in rainfall without climate change. And because of that variability, the climate model is not able to discern whether we're going to see an increase or a decrease for most of the state, including this part of the state. So the climate models aren't saying it's going to get wetter or it's going to get drier. One thing the climate models are showing, though, is that the rainfall is going to get more intense. And so we'll get a lot more of our rain in bursts of rain rather than perhaps more spread out than it was before. That is showing up in the data. So the measured data, the state climatologist has done an analysis and shows that is happening for the hill country. So we're seeing that. Temperature is easier to model. So, you know, we know that that's going to happen as it goes forward. Yeah. You know, and quite frankly, I've been in Texas since '91, and it's a hell of a lot hotter than it was that first decade I was here. I mean, you could almost count on a sleet storm by Thanksgiving in the '90s, it seemed. And, we don't get too many of those, barring what happened earlier this year.
Can you help us understand a little bit of why we get a well in Blanco, even though 9 miles down from Rock pushing water out like crazy? Johnson City can have groundwater, but Blanco has to have surface water because we're all kind of in the same place, but it doesn't work out.
So did everybody hear that? So reason is heterogeneity. So the aquifers vary geologically, faulting tends to really help getting high permeability in the aquifer. You're just pretty much kind of unlucky, being where you're at. That's kind of an opening for me to talk about what happened. I want to say it was 99 when Blanco was desperately looking for groundwater. And I moved into the board at that time, and the agency had a drilling rig and they were drilling a well. The city, and I may be wrong about this, but I want to say the city was looking for a 350 gallon per minute well, is what I remember. And hopefully I don't piss anybody off in the room telling this story. And it was a long time ago. I've had many margaritas, so it may not be 100% accurate. But with those qualifiers, I'll go on. And then there was a driller out of San Antonio that said, he'll wildcat a well, and the city doesn't have to pay for it unless it comes in. So he was up here drilling. And then the city hired a water witcher and did a drive-by water witching out the window of a Suburban around town and located a well to drill. And being the geek that I am, I'm like, well, we got this great database. Let me go take a look at what the odds are going to be for getting a 350 gallon per minute well on the city limits of Blanco. I mean, going in with the hypothesis is that probably was not going to be likely, because like you said, Blanco is not known for having great wells. And it was less than a 0.1% chance looking at the data. And sure enough, none of those wells came in at 350 gallons per minute. And I did take a look in the database. Actually, there's another well that the city owns that was reported when it was drilled about 60 gallons per minute. And there's a second well the city owns that came in at 60 gallons per minute, which is decent, although there's not an indication of could it do that for a year. So just the bad luck of the draw. Blame the forefathers. I'll go back here and then over here.
This is just the Blanco River, 16.3 goes dry right underneath the soil, underneath the riverbed, flowing like crazy. So how deep down is the water? How deep down? Where does it go? Come back up?
Yeah, the question is again, the paraphrase is when the water does, and the Blanco does go underground, where is it going? How deep down does it go? I didn't show the map, but that report or that paper I pulled a lot of figures out of, mapped out total dissolved solids of the groundwater, so like the salinity. And it's pretty fascinating because it shows a big freshwater plume from the losing reach of the Blanco, heading towards essentially San Marcos, heading towards the Edwards Aquifer down there, suggesting that some of that water is going quite a ways to the east-southeast. Some of it is probably not traveling too far before it comes back out. Like in Jacobs Well, most of the creek above Jacobs Well is losing. And then it just dramatically pops up at Jacobs Well because there's a fault there. Blanco's, I think, is a bit more complicated. Let's see, I'm going to go here first and then back there.
Creating a picture of an aquifer. You put the measurement down well, correct?
Yeah.
Does that usually happen on private wells, or do the creators go out and dig a bunch of wells?
So the question is whose wells are we using when hydrogeologists are measuring water levels? Generally, it's private wells. And that's because it's expensive to drill wells. But there are groundwater districts that have money to drill their own wells. So for example, Barton Springs Edwards Aquifer Conservation District has drilled some really fancy wells where in that single well, they're kind of blocking off different parts of the aquifer so they can measure changes. They have enough money to do that better understand their aquifer system. But my experience, it's mostly, sweet talking landowners to gain access and measure the wells. The one well that I showed you in Blanco that had a lot of data, that was looked like maybe it was going down. I mean, that was a city well that the local groundwater district has a monitoring station on to gauge. So I'm going to go back here and then to the front again.
So this accident regulation is our biggest concern. Is we're going to build this mud right outside. We're going to build 1,000+ houses. Well, the Blanco doesn't have enough water for Blanco right now, and water is undrinkable. I don't think it's met state standards for as long as I can remember. So does anyone ever inquire with, an entity like you to go, where's the water coming from? And,
Do you know where they planning to get their water from? Okay. I know, I'm not as familiar on the surface water side. I know on the groundwater side, if a development is putting in wells, there is a groundwater availability study requirement. And I'm 95% sure those get delivered to the groundwater district, and they also go to the state. And so there's those, although those vary in quality. It's also one of the issues with those is they act like they're the only development in the entire hill country. So they don't consider what's going on around them, which is a potential issue.
And the groundwater district regulate those?
So the groundwater district can regulate them, if they're putting in one well or big wells to supply water, then yes, they would have to get a permit from the groundwater district. And then it's a function of what the groundwater district's rules are, and how they're managing the resource. If it's a bunch of single home wells, again, depending, there's kind of a loophole in there that if you're if your lot is less than 10 acres, I'm sorry, if your lot is, if your lot is less than 10 acres, then you could fall under the regulatory authority of the groundwater district. But generally, household wells are exempt from district's rules.
Actually, I have a place on the little micro river that I've had almost 30 years. Back then, that river ran all the time. Now it never runs. And I don't know if I should attribute that to people drilling more wells or out driving.
Yeah, that's so you live on a tributary to the Blanco, or you have property in the little, used to flow, now doesn't flow anymore. So is that due to wells or something else? Great question. It would require a study, but it's like, it could be the wells, could be the warming that's going on, because the further west you get, are seeing more upper reaches of gaining streams. Basically the head springs are moving downstream. That could be due to warming and less recharge, or it could be both of them together. I'm going to go here and then in the back.
If we were to use private wells, does that well need to be silent for some period of time to let the water level out, or if I turn the faucet on and run it all night and it's not maybe the next day, it might impact me.
Another great question is, if we're using a private well for monitoring, does it need to be silent? In other words, does it need to not be pumped? Yes, because to get we call it the ambient, kind of the background water level, then yes, you would want the well to sit for a bit unused, or ideally it's just an unused well. The Water Development Board and some of the districts, I don't know if Blanco County District does, will have similar to like the USGS real-time stream flow monitoring stations. There's also real-time groundwater flow monitoring stations, and those are always in wells that I don't want to say abandoned, but they're no longer pumped. So it's they're intended to purely reflect the ambient conditions. If your neighbor's well is really close and he or she are pumping the holy heck out of it, that's another thing to worry about as well. Sir?
We stated all the problems, and what's the solution?
That's an excellent point. What's the solution? Well, on probably the easiest one to tackle is on the water quality side is to, there's a lot of concern in the hill country about treated wastewater going into pristine hill country streams, and for good reason, because you do get increased nutrients, and it affects the hill country streams and rivers. So there's a number of solutions there, and the one that folks are using a lot now is rather than doing direct discharge to the stream, is to treat and do land application or reuse that water. Use it for irrigation, in other words, land application, and to keep it out of the river or the stream. There's a community in Travis County, north of Dripping Springs, that's taken that a step further. Somehow, and I don't know the story, but like Austin has been able to prevent anybody from discharging wastewater into Lake Travis, as well as into any of the contributing streams to the Barton Springs segment of the Edwards Aquifer. And there's a water provider up there that also does sewage treatment, and they do land application to avoid illegally discharging to Lake Travis. They're growing in population, and land is very expensive. So they took a look at would it be less expensive to completely clean that water back to drinking standards and put it back into their distribution system? And the answer was yes. And so they're actually going to completely clean that water up and then put it back into their drinking water distribution system. Direct potable reuse is what that's called. There could be more advanced treatment used before water is discharged to a river or a stream to protect the water quality in the streams. But it does get more expensive, so people don't like doing that. Texas regulations meet the minimum EPA requirements. EPA does kind of hope and encourage states to reach kind of elevated treatment levels for particular areas. Like Florida treats certain of their rivers differently to keep them pristine. And it's similar to Central Texas. They get a lot of limestone karst aquifers there. On the other issue of pumping affecting the springs and things like that, that one's a little stickier. I always say that groundwater is the entry drug to development because it's cheap, it's distributed, and the developers can come in and, hey, you got your own well, we got you set up, and then take your money, and you never see them again, and then 10, 20 years down the road, the drought hits and the wells go dry. And then somebody brings in surface water. So if development is going to continue, which counties do not have much power at all, if any, to control development, maybe it's leaping straight to a surface water supply or alternative supply to kind of minimize groundwater production. If maintaining springs and gaining rivers is important to y'all. A lot of people like live water. It's a lot funner to go to a river that has water in it, right? Than it is to go to one that doesn't. So there's a lot of people that enjoy that. During the COVID pandemic, although now we're back in the pandemic, right? My wife and I came out and checked out the park here in Blanco. It's obviously a well-loved park. A lot of folks out there. There's kind of springs coming out of the sides. Very beautiful. So people using water more efficiently. Not only turning the faucet off when you're brushing your teeth, but getting. It's like, do we really need St. Augustine in the hill country? Right? Nobody here is St. Augustine, right? Raise your hand if you got St. Augustine. Rainwater harvesting. I talked to someone for the presentation about how they're completely on rainwater. I think a lot because of necessity, but there's a lot of pros to rainwater, water quality, things like that. And I don't know about y'all, but I love tanks. I love rainwater tanks. Drive down the road, I'm like, look, rainwater tank to my wife. But that's a way to conserve the source water. There's something that we're working on at the Meadow Center it's called kind of One Water, and it's considered like urban water conservation. I hate that they use the word urban. It's really built environment, water conservation on steroids. And Wimberley built their new elementary school, using One Water principles, and they were able to reduce, so by capturing rainwater, by capturing air conditioning condensate, doing on-site wastewater treatment and reusing that water for irrigation, they're able to reduce pumping of the Trinity Aquifer 90%. And over the life of the school, they anticipate $800,000 in savings. So it actually saves money. So thinking outside the box, there's kind of an off-the-shelf way to do things that people are used to. Right? There's some more innovative way to do things these days that can help preserve source water. So just some ideas. Let's see. I'll go.
Just need some clarification. Penrose and Trinity, are they overlapping in this area?
Yeah, so the upper Glen Rose is the upper Trinity, and then the lower Glen Rose is part of the middle Trinity, along with the Hensel and the Austin.
So they're sharing different names.
Yeah, so geologists have names for their formations, and then hydrogeologists have names for their aquifers. So that's why sometimes they're the same, but usually they look different. I'm going to go back there and then over here. Well, you guys have lots of great questions. Everybody hear that? So it's like, what? So the question is, correct me if I got it wrong, but they live on it's kind of a dry creek, thinking about putting up a little dam to capture some of that water. And so what are the things to think about in terms of kind of water quality, folks downstream, and things like that? The state law allows landowners to put up call it a dam, but I mean it's pretty low, but a dam to hold no more than 200 acre feet, I believe. There could be a local benefit to recharging the aquifer by holding that water, increasing the residence time of that water, assuming that there's some sort of recharge feature in the footprint of what that small tank or that pond looks like. And that's probably a good thing, unless your neighbors up the street have a confined area of feed operation, or up the creek, then you're just capturing a bunch of urine and cow poop, which you might not want. But you don't have cows out here, so you don't have to worry about that. Point is you might consider what's upstream, but you're probably okay there. But it does intercept flow that would go downstream that could recharge the aquifer in a more arguably natural way or location. It might decrease flow into a downstream neighbor's dam, which maybe you don't care about. Well, I want my own dam. He's got his damn dam, I got my damn dam. And I'm higher up on the stream. And there is a suggestion that landowners, as ranches have been breaking up across Texas into smaller pieces, and people getting their little piece of Texas heaven, and it's almost a Texan thing to have a tank on your property if you can get one. But there is a concern that the number of tanks is actually decreasing flow into the rivers and into the reservoirs. So that's also a concern. So I hope you sleep good tonight. Oh, so great question. Wouldn't the same thing be true if everybody was collecting rainwater? No. And I get that question a lot, because you think if everybody's, and I've made these calculations, everybody now, theoretically, yes, there should be an impact. Everybody in Texas collected rainwater. It's like 0.00001% decrease in surface water flow. Now, the reason for that goes back to that water budget for Texas. 86% of all the rain that falls goes back up into the sky. And so most of the rain is going back up to the sky. So if you're sticking in a tank, you're preventing 86 gallons of the 100 you collected from going back up into the sky. The other thing is that in the built environment, we actually, and this isn't considered in my calculation, but in the built environment, we're actually creating more runoff. So when you come back on balance, I think that actually with humans, we're creating more surface water and less surface water, even if we collected rain off of everybody's roof in the state. So a good question. Did you ask that? Let's see, you crab at you, sorry.
A lot of us here are really, I'm on the edge of our seat here with this, mentions mud coming in with 1,000 pounds, and that doesn't match up with the 2070 projection.
Yeah, that was my first thought. Yeah.
One of the things that was most startling to me that I've seen recently is a map from the Water Development Board that showed in three different areas in Blanford County, 100-foot drop in the water table since between 75 and 2008, I believe. Can you comment on that?
So the question is concerns about the big development going in, and then she'd seen a map from the Water Development Board showing declines of 100 feet or more.
Several areas, and one of them was right close.
Right here. I haven't seen that map.
Yeah.
So I wish I had, otherwise I'd love to comment on it. Let's see. Oh gosh, everybody's raising their hand. We'll go to the lady in the back.
You may have already addressed it, and you did just touch on it, but would you speak about impervious cover? We know it's impact, what's the impact getting to the aquifer and surface water?
Okay, gosh, another great question. My PhD advisor, after I got my degree, went out into the world, wound up looking at those very issues of impervious cover and really urban environment. Let me expand it to the urban environment and how that affects groundwater. Now, your gut would tell you, as it told me before he did his research, is that when you have a parking lot, that decreases recharge to the aquifer, right? But it turns out in an urban environment, there's actually an increase in recharge. And oftentimes, not always, but most of the time. And it's because the parking lot is offset by people irrigating, which is basically increased rainfall. So you've enhanced rainfall, leaking infrastructure. So, an average municipal water provider in Texas, for every 100 gallons they put in their distribution system, they lose 15 gallons. That's leaking into the subsurface, oftentimes below the root zone. So that's like going straight into the aquifer, not even have to fight the plants. Those of you that are delicate, cover your ears. Leaking sewage lines, also fluids coming out of there, which I haven't seen anybody estimate or guesstimate how much is leaking out of there, but I guess it's more than 15% because we care as much about sewage leaking out of pipes. And so on balance, in urban areas, you'll see water tables rising and causing problems. Lubbock has that issue because of all those things I just mentioned. So, but the impervious cover definitely does increase runoff to the local streams and rivers. There was a point in the past where it's either Dallas or Fort Worth was trying to get credit from TCEQ on their surface water permit for the increased runoff from the urban setting, so they could claim that water, which they were denied. Oh yeah, one more. There were two. I think there were two people who had their hands up. We'll do the fellow way in the back, and then we'll do this guy. We'll sneak one in. Don't tell her. Okay, so that map. So think back to that map of Texas with the brown areas that showed opportunities for surface water groundwater interaction. There's gaps. There's not recognized major or minor aquifers, but there may be local aquifers like alluvium, sand, and gravels along creeks that aren't in that map. But then a lot of it also is shales and clays, and so it's just they're not aquifers. So like Taylor Marl or Austin Chalk that pops up once you start getting off the edge of the hill country is not considered an aquifer and doesn't absorb much water and interact much. So it's just the geology and whether or not there's an aquifer there. And one more.
On the range, we pull water out of the ground. The water much anything except that you're hanging baskets. Then it goes into the same. All water we pull out of the ground, it goes back.
Yeah, septic systems, that's another source of recharge. Yeah, that's a good question. I haven't thought about it from the standpoint of septic systems, but like I'm a water conservationist, so I'm always kind of thinking about how to save water around the house. And I'm not a big fan of gray water harvesting because you're taking water that would normally go down the drain. In your case, it would go to your septic tank. Hopefully your septic tank's working properly, and then put the water back into the ground. Or in an urban setting, it goes to a wastewater treatment plant, which then treats it and reuses it, or maybe like in Austin's case, they treat it and put it into the Colorado River. Austin doesn't care about wastewater once it's Austin. And treated wastewater, Colorado River is not a pristine stream as it gets off the hill country. Arguably not pristine when it's in the hill country, but so treated wastewater is an important source of water for like environmental flows and folks downstream. So like in an urban setting, when you think about the losses, maybe 60, 70% goes back to the environment. Just don't water those plants too much because that's evapotranspiration. It's going back up the sky. All right, getting cut off.
I bet we can get Dr. Mix to hang around, but thank him for us, please. Thank you all for coming, and it's nice to see so many people out. Water is our lifeblood. No water, no us. So thanks for being here. We're going to continue. The Texas AgriLife is having their watershed steward program in Blanco this year, September 8th. It will be here. So you can register for that. It's a half day and you will learn. We all live in a watershed. So you'll figure out where you are. You don't have to be on a river or on a stream to have the impact and everything that flows, the groundwater, et cetera. So it's a great program. You can log on, get more information. And again, if you're not a member at Gem of the Hills, do please join. $25 a year. We need your participation. And again, thank you, Dr. Mason.